Judge Mitchell has many roles. He is the senior pastor of Christ the Solid Rock Baptist Church, and he has been there for almost 13 years. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin Law School, but he is the presiding judge over the juvenile division in Dane County. He is also has an incredible educational background. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics and Religion from Morehouse College, Master of Divinity and Master of Theology from Princeton Theological Seminary, and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is a father and is married to the love of his life, Dr. Mankazama Mitchell. And one of his quotes that I found online was, "Justice is not what you say, justice is what you do." So with great honor and gratitude, I present Judge Honorable Reverend Everett Mitchell.
All right, thank you all so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all today. It is a esteemed privilege. I see we got Eau Claire in here, and there's some other places throughout the state. So just good morning to everyone, and I hope you can hear me okay. And I will have a couple of videos that I'll highlight today. So hopefully you have you'll hear some of the videos. But I'm grateful to be here. My commitment not only to the work that I do, but having a bivocational work where I am a judge, but also a pastor, means that I get to infuse a lot of the work that I do and a belief that I have in my faith into my work, so that we are trying to produce a generation of people who love justice. And that's that phrase, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God? That's why I say justice is not what you say, it's what you do. And we are to be making sure that we do justice. And that is what we'll be thinking about this morning. So what I've prepared for you really is a way to talk about one of the things that I'm very passionate about, which is the disruption of the child welfare to juvenile delinquency to adult prison pipeline. And it's an important piece for me because without that, I think we lose the capacity to understand the depth of the issues that we see happening within our community. And so today really is about sharing with you these ideas and really sharing with you philosophy, and then what we've done to overcome some of those barriers that we see, and then transform the lives of so many young people, so that we're not doing what I know we are here to fight against, which is the over-incarceration of folks of color in our state. But everything that I do is grounded in some beliefs and belief system. One of the great pioneer attorneys is Bryan Stevenson, and I love this quote from him when he said, "We've submitted to the harsh instinct to crush those among us whose brokenness is most visible, but simply punishing the broken and walking away from them or hiding them from sight only ensures that they remain broken, and we do too." It's the idea that sometimes criminal justice is done in the shadows, is done in a way that people are invisible because there's no intersection of relationships between communities. Then people can just disappear and nobody knows where they are, mainly because there's never been a relationship cemented for them to even know. So I'm always thinking that hiding individuals, hiding communities, even those who've been incarcerated, remains that our society continues to remain broken throughout that process. Another quote that I love is from Frederick Douglass. It's the idea that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men and women. So the idea that if we're really going to make a dent on, recidivism and the changes in our society, it comes from an idea that we really should be out front to making sure that we're building the strong children that we need to have. Like just yesterday when I was, we call a reverse waiver hearing, where they want to waive a 15-year-old into adult court so that he has to deal with adult consequences. In the report, one of the things that it said was that this young man who's 15 years old, who's committed a lot of crimes, finally was revealed that he has a 3rd grade reading level and a 4th grade math level at 15 years old. And where he's at right now, they only give him assignments in a Chromebook and a worksheet. And then they wonder why he can't independently do his work. Well, he can't read and he can't do math independently because, he can't do the work. And so it's those kind of things, like if we really do want to make an impact on the overall, justice system, then we have to make sure that we're building up strong generations that have the competencies that they need in order for them to be thoroughly successful in the long term. And so, one of the things that we always talk about is that, Wisconsin still remains one of the worst states in terms of racial disparities, especially as relates to the juvenile justice system. And it's not, how do we address that? How do we deal with the reality of what we see being brought before our court systems continues to be a unique challenge for us. And so I think, what we want to do often is to make sure that we're addressing, juvenile justice system from a way that is both humane and equitable at the same time. We continue to see Wisconsin right there, right up under, the top states with the largest black to white disparity in juvenile justice. You see Wisconsin is always, second, behind New Jersey. It's one of those things that we want to make sure that we are, being thoughtful about, not hidden and don't hide it, but really trying our best to be proactive in addressing some of those disparities so that we don't lead, at least don't come second in the nation on those kind of disparities. One of the things that when I teach my class and my students, one of the things I'm most known for is stressing the idea that we know about the school to prison pipeline. What I want to educate our communities on is on the child welfare to juvenile delinquency to adult prison pipeline, which is basically where we're passing traumatized children from one system to the next and not getting them the resources and help that they need. So when I say that, it means that most people, unless you work in the system, really don't have any idea how the child welfare system operates. They really don't have any idea how the juvenile justice system operates. We have some idea about the adult criminal justice system, mainly because it is visible and it's open to the public. These other two systems are very confidential. And so because they're confidential, it's hard to get data and real-time work and support to get them, to get, our communities aware of what it looks like and how it looks. And so because of that, most of us, most community members don't understand that for the majority of the movement in our systems, a lot of the men and women who end up in the adult criminal justice system were already known to the system because they started in the child welfare system, picked up juvenile justice cases, and then ended up in the adult system. So we look at things like pervasive poverty, that inadequate health and mental health care, gaps in early childhood education, some of the education outcomes similar to the young man I told you about, chronic abuse and neglect cases that happen over years. And then once these young children, as young as the age of 2 and 3, get to 10 years old in Wisconsin, they could start to be criminally charged in the juvenile justice system. So 10 years old, I always give my students 10, 14, 17. 10 years old is when they can be criminally charged. 14 years old is when they can be waived into adult court, and 17 years old is when they are automatically sent into the adult criminal justice system. So the advocacy sometimes is trying to keep 17-year-olds from being in a space where, or at least raise the age to 18 so that we don't have young 17-year-old children facing the possibility of adult offenses. But this is a continuum that I talk about a lot, and then think about different strategies to break that up over time are still very, very, very important to me. When I became a judge, one of the things that I realized is like a lot of the things that we were trauma informed, a lot of people have been to trauma trainings, but the practices that we were implementing were not trauma informed. So you had young people coming into courts in restraints and handcuffs and belts. Adults rarely listen to children. The idea of trauma, when do you deal with trauma? How do you deal with trauma? Was something that a lot of the adults wanted the young people to deal with the trauma on their timetables rather than addressing the trauma when they have available resources and feel safe. We saw children being sent to Lincoln Hills that were unnecessarily brought to Lincoln Hills. We will see significant mental health concerns, a lot of young people who were not able to timely receive their mental health. And then we saw a lot of use of shortened school days with the young people who were being placed on IEPs, but yet having a shortened school day. And basically a shortened school day is a reduction in the normal time that children are given instruction within a building. So some of the young people, especially according involved with IEPs, were sometimes only going to school for 2 hours a day at most, and most of them were not inside the educational buildings. Most of them were outside in the community somewhere else. So we had a lot in trauma-informed people, but within the system itself, the practices that we were implementing were not trauma-informed. And so one of the things that I've always tried to do was focus in on what are ways that we can transform the narrative so that we can refocus our attention on what is happening with our young people. One of the ways that I've tried to do that is through media. I think media is a good platform for us to be able to use to help implement what it is that people need to see. And what I'm about to show you a clip of is a documentary called Not Enough Apologies, Trauma Stories. And it was a wonderful and courageous opportunity for the young man to give us permission to film his case so that his story could be told. So that he captures this idea of what I mean when I say child welfare, juvenile delinquency to adult prison pipeline. So we'll watch this clip of this for a little bit, and then we can continue on with the presentation. Show up, your father didn't show up.
Trauma that they're enduring just seems to be more severe and more long-lasting.
Never said I'm sorry.
And I am still working through things that happened to me when I was 10.
There's ghosts in the nursery. I literally didn't know what to do.
You know, people say, well, you don't have enough time.
If we could go back in time, maybe.
That's all we have.
I don't think giving up is really an option.
There's not enough apologies that one could give to say, I'm sorry.
Funding for Not Enough Apologies Trauma Stories was provided by Focus Fund for Journalism and Friends of Wisconsin Public Television.
All rise.
So much pain, so much brokenness.
Dane County Juvenile Court Judge Everett Mitchell says when he first took the bench in 2016, his days would often end in tears, his own tears.
As I started listening to these children and reading their stories and letting them talk to me, I started realizing there's been nobody in their lives. And every adult that's been in their life has caused them more and more pain.
Mitchell presides over cases of children who've been removed from their homes for dangerous circumstances, including abuse and neglect, and cases where children are charged with the juvenile equivalent of crimes.
At the onset, very traumatized children who experience all sorts of trauma from removal, home, abuse, neglect. It's not always clear that they're able to get the resources and the help they need to process all that pain. So it starts with emotional outbursts, and those emotional outbursts turn into disorderly conducts.
Mitchell says he sees a steady progression of the same juveniles catching adult criminal charges. He calls it the child welfare to adult prison pipeline.
We're going to take the handcuffs off.
On this day, the courtroom door opens to a case in point. Bailiffs bring in a boy held in the juvenile detention center who looks much younger than his 16 years. The judge orders the boy's handcuffs removed. It's an effort, he says, to try to change what it's like to be a child in the system.
We know these children are traumatized. We knew that they were in pain. It made no sense to indiscriminately bring them into the courtroom in handcuffs.
What's up?
You doing all right?
Yeah.
Better today?
Yeah.
I came to see you.
Long before he appeared in this courtroom, the boy lived a life of relentless adverse childhood experiences. In the child welfare system since the age of 5, first as a victim of 23 reports of physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, living in institutions since he was 9, group homes, foster homes, treatment centers, juvenile prison, more than 30 placements. I don't have anybody, he told a social worker. A court transcript reads that at the age of 10 years old, he could not understand why his mother would not want to see him. It says while living in a foster home, the boy's mother told him she was coming to visit. Testimony showed he walked around for 2 days with his backpack, looking out and watching for his mother to come and visit with him. But she never showed up.
And he wasn't getting treatment, and I think
And now he's before a judge with his own public defender sitting next to him in court.
That's not what happened. I don't think that anybody entered the world predisposed to sell drugs or steal cars necessarily in the nature versus nurture debate. How did that 12-year-old who may not even be able to touch the ground with his feet, how did they end up in that chair?
As children become teenagers, criminal charges can amass, as in this case. State Representative Evan Goyke plainly connects trauma to incarceration. State statistics show 98% of incarcerated youth have experienced trauma.
The vast majority of juveniles that are in custody tonight had some kind of child welfare intervention when they were younger, likely where that trauma was experienced.
For his part, Mitchell sends children to the state juvenile correctional facilities sparingly. In fact, the judge ordered the boy before him here removed from Lincoln Hills when the teenager wrote to him complaining about repeatedly being jumped and beaten up at the prison.
because, you know, he was just getting beat up too bad. I brought him here the first time, and nobody showed up from his family to take custody of him.
There are a lot of juveniles that have been incarcerated at substandard facilities, and we see the evidence through the high recidivism rate. We see that that program doesn't work by the fact that they continue to engage in criminal and risky behavior. If the facility was working, that number would be lower.
And yet what to do in the face of continued criminal and risky behavior, like the alleged behavior of the 16-year-old before Judge Mitchell? This police pursuit video shows a chase and crash on a Madison highway in February of 2018. According to prosecutors, the teen before Judge Mitchell was the driver of the stolen car involved. As a result, prosecutors in court that day told the judge they deemed the juvenile a danger to public safety.
I think that the safety of the community should be a paramount consideration here, and that at this point we have enough of a track record just in the recent months that every time we have released him, we have had new victims, we've had new crimes.
There is conflict between acknowledging a person's traumatized background and holding them accountable for their actions, especially when those actions can be crimes. Mental health police officer Andrew Muir confronts deep trauma in the communities he serves.
We see horrible things. We see horrible abuse. We see horrible neglect. But we encounter some kids with really profound traumas at such an early age that it impacts brain development, let alone their relationship with almost anyone. The catch-22, if you will, for law enforcement and being trauma-informed is that there's only a certain extent to which we can compensate for that based on sort of our very nature and what we exist for.
That being to protect and serve public safety.
Thank you. And I'll call therapists and see if we can get it.
Prosecutors in juvenile court lamented that every time the boy before Judge Mitchell was released, he committed new crimes. One new crime landed the 16-year-old in court again,
appalling childhood.
this time in adult court on felony charges.
Count 1 is a serious charge. Attempted first-degree intentional homicide, use of dangerous weapon. If convicted with the enhancer, defendant faces 65 years in prison.
Judge Mitchell says this case that started as a child in need of protection and services leaves him broken.
This is, to me, like the worst Chip's case ever, you know, because he's alone. And not only is he alone now he's alone facing adult consequences for some of the choices that he got involved in with some of his friends. He falls into this unique place where I don't think all of his needs have been taken care of, and I know all of his treatment needs have not been addressed, and there's not enough apologies that one could give to say, I'm sorry for what your mother didn't show up, or how your father didn't show up, or how families didn't show up, or the times in which you were abused in these places.
Even as he presides from the bench, Mitchell relates to the children of trauma who come before him.
Part of my patience for these children is, that was me. Every last one of them. I grew up, protecting my sister from an abuser for 12 years. I grew up being abused myself sexually. And I know what it's like to be locked inside of yourself and so gone and so confused and so angry. And so I tell the kids all the time, I'm not your judge. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to show you that I'm your reflection. Whatever you see in me, you can be the exact same thing, because some of you are smarter than I was. You're a survivor. You have power that you just have not even begun to tap into. So if you think I'm special, then remember that I'm just your reflection.
If we could go back in time maybe and kind of start when these kids were younger and use that model of not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you. If that would have been the mantra of when my clients now who are 12 and 13 were 4 and 5, I don't think we'd be where we are right now.
So that is a way for a video of a way to kind of explain what I mean when I say the child welfare, the juvenile delinquency to adult prison pipeline, that young man experienced so much pain and hurt at a very early age, got into the JV system. By the time I was elected, I picked up the case and started working with him and his family. His mother never showed up to court but once the entire time that we had him. And eventually he ended up in the adult system in Waukesha, and Waukesha sentenced him to, at the age of 17, sentenced him to 45 years in prison, 25 in, 20 out. So he'll be in his 40s before he gets out, and then even later, almost 60-something before he's actually done with his sentence itself. So that's very important to me when I look at that kind of case to ask, what is it that we have done and what is it that we can do moving forward to reduce the trauma of a lot of our young people who are coming into court. So there are a couple of steps that we've done in our court system to try to help reduce that trauma. One of the things that is very important to me is making sure that there's this message that we send to young people that reminds them that they're not inferior. And because I think a lot of times the young people in our system, they feel an element of inferiority because of who they are, what they've been through, and those impacts. So we try to change that narrative to give them a message that they're not inferior. So this is just a little small clip. And it reminds me all the time to when I'm with the young people or when I have a moment there in court to make sure that I give them a kind of a mini speech to say to them that you're not alone, that you're not inferior, that you are special.
Can you hear me? Good. You are not inferior. Your grades may be, your school may have been, but you can turn that around and make liars out of those bastards in exactly 1 hour, and you take that test and pass it and win. So here's what I want you to do. When you find your minds wandering, I want you to knuckle back down and concentrate. Concentrate. Remember what's at stake. And show them what Eastside High is all about. A spirit that will not die.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need your pride if I have things you
Yeah, so that's always a good video that gets me all excited too. I wanted to just remind anyone, if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat, or just you can always just jump in if you have a question and you can't use the chat to ask those questions. I'll be more than willing to answer. So the question then often I get is, what are we attempting to deter in our system? Well, one of the things that I have a list of things that I always try to do is, I think theoretically, we're trying to make sure we don't add additional trauma to young people who are in our systems. So that means being very thoughtful about words. You'll hear me say a lot of times terms like children, because I'm trying to move away from language like juvenile delinquent, because that kind of language is not helpful to any of the partners who are listening. I want them to see them as children. We're trying to deter future criminal behavior. I'm trying to make sure that, especially for our young men and women, that we don't act in such a way where it makes it more attractive for them to be captured into human trafficking. We have a lot of young people who get caught up in human trafficking, that lead from the foster home to human trafficking. And we want to make sure that we are being very thoughtful about how we engage, so that lifestyle and that opportunity does not come and get them. We're trying to make sure that they're not moving into the adult criminal justice system. We want to make sure that they're meeting their educational goals, because it's important to me that they have their education cemented. And then we want to make sure that we walk away from the idea of juvenile homelessness, because after the age of 18, a lot of young people have nowhere to go. So if there are some things that what are some laws that I would change in Wisconsin? It'd probably be one of the things that we worked hard to change is the presumption in Wisconsin, which means that which is to remove the shackling of children in court. Obviously we were not going to get that through the legislature, but we were able to change that presumption, which means that children now in Wisconsin are presumed to come into court without the need for handcuffs, belts, or restraints. That's a very important step for me, and a very important step for us to make sure we change that presumption. There's some other things that we always talk about, which is raising the age to 18 years old versus 17, because it will give us more time to work with some of the young people. But at least the things that we can change, we've been working hard to change those things, to give more opportunities for communities to work with our young people and not add additional trauma to them. One of the things I continue to always stress, again, I'll do one more video and then I'll go more toward my solutions, which is what I believe could be helpful to all of us, is using media to spread awareness. So when I say it's far easier to build strong children, it is also choosing to change the narrative of how trauma is being introduced into the lives of young people. And it's generally introduced through, caring relationships or caring partnerships through their family and family systems. So how can we work hard to make sure that we are doing the best we can to reduce that trauma? And one way I did that was to partner with our district attorney's office here in Dane County to produce a video that talks about the need to reduce corporal punishment as an outcome. And so just want to briefly share that with you, because I think that is an important part of reducing trauma in children.
Many of parents in our country have grown up with physical discipline, and it was believed that that was the right way to parent a child. And a lot of times people look back and they say, well, I experienced physical discipline and look at me, I'm okay. Is okay the measure that we want to measure our success by? Violence has been a part of our history. That doesn't mean we have to make it part of our culture.
When you think about corporal punishment, it is rooted in this notion of violence as the cure for everything that ails us.
In a sense, using physical discipline really sort of says might makes right. It's not because it's reasonable, it's not because it's logical, it's because I said so.
Parenting is not about control. It's about making sure that they understand the values of what is inside of them. It's all about being very intentional. And when you are intentional, you give yourself and your child more of a beautiful relationship, not less. What we're trying to introduce is a different model that's rooted in, not in fear, but giving you permission to actually love, maybe in ways that you haven't been loved.
We need to ensure our kids are treating each other and others around them with dignity and respect. And that's really where the core is when you take physical discipline off the plate. We now know that parenting with love, dignity, respect is what really allows children to flourish. The research shows there is no positive effect from physical discipline, none. The best you can hope for is to have no effect at all.
I think the key is the young child that we make a difference in who's experienced trauma. And that could be crisis, it could be treatment, it could be one event, it could be multiple trauma events. But what we know today about brain development, it can freeze a person socially and emotionally in that particular stage, is critical to be able to, in a timely way, be able to make a difference in providing stability, because that will prevent the future problems from occurring later.
Now, the hard thing when you're talking to parents about physical discipline, and if they've used it, to say, take that out of your tool bag. What do you replace it with? Especially if they're talking about teenagers. Where do they go?
If you want your child to be caring and kind and generous, then guess what? They have to see it through you. And parenting really should be not just do what I say, it should be rooted in be who I am. And if you want that little body to be loving and kind and generous and smiling and achieving high, where are they gonna get that from? They have to get it from you. Parenting is about consistency and love. It takes more creativity at times than just, going to grab a belt. That's easy, but, learning how to punish or give responsibility or to give accountability, whether it's coming from you or it's coming from other people, that creativity is what you need. It's really about being able to be there to help process what young people are going through.
It's not going to be easier parenting. It's really not. But it's going to have a real impact on your child's success, on your child's relationships, and on the community as a whole, because we hopefully will have less violence. We'll have less situations where people are thinking, you know what, it's okay to pick up a gun and fire a gun. It's okay for me to take what I want from you because I'm bigger and stronger than you.
It is only in human nature that we have been taught to do something that is against our nature. Just because it was done to you doesn't mean you have to do it to somebody else. We have to be the ones who decide what we want for our children moving forward. And just because something has been okay doesn't always make it right.
It is never too late. I think Maya Angelou sort of says it best. And, she said, you do the best you can until you know better. And then you do better. If we don't want violence in our community, we have to take violence out of our homes. And it starts with our kids.
My children won't even know what it is because it has never happened to them. So then when they share discipline and boundaries with their children, it won't be rooted in them thinking that they can go to the easy way of grabbing something and hurting their children. No, we were rooted in love. We were rooted in boundaries. And I think if we did that 1,000,000 times, we will reproduce a generation that's rooted in values and love, and maybe they won't hurt each other, and maybe they won't kill each other because we have given another generation the freedom to know what love is. So in time, due to time limitation, let me just go and start talking a little bit more about some specific solutions One of the things that we have really focused on is building culturally based mental health services and putting them under contract so that we could help with families. That has really been very beneficial for a lot of the families, especially the Black and brown families who come into court, so that they can have a trusting therapist that they work with. We built a family first model that allows the county to intervene with preventative services before a formal petition is filed in the court system. That has always been helpful, working ahead, getting ahead of the concerns that we have. We do different experiences in the community, partnering with groups like Above the Clouds to kind of bring in young people so they could be able to fly planes. I'm like, if you're still in cars, you need to learn how to fly a plane. So to elevate your experiences so that you can see different things in the world and see the different possibilities that your life can give you. One of the things that I talked to your team about is recruiting more CASA volunteers, and CASA is called a Court Appointed Special Advocates. I think every community could start a CASA program, or at least find support for your CASA program, because it really gives the only way for community members to come into our court systems and to be able to participate in a very meaningful way. You know, it's just almost like a big brothers, big sister program, but it's more court related. So you give, you know, stuff to the court system, to the judge, and every community really needs a CASA program to coincide, especially the more rural you are, the more you really need a CASA program, because you don't have access to all of the services that like maybe a place like Milwaukee or Dane or even La Crosse may have. But you want to be able to make sure that the faith community is bonding together to be able to come together to provide a different service that may not be available in the community. You know, trying to nurture housing and employment partnerships. So how do we work with a lot of the faith communities, the schools, you know, our United Way, Boys and Girls Club, to make sure that we have employment opportunities and partnerships. We try to include what I call whole system partners in the juvenile justice system so that we can educate the entire community about the things that we have. I started doing ride-alongs with community leaders so they could participate. In the video that you saw while I was on the bench, the guy who was sitting next to me is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club and does a wonderful job. But I wanted him to come in and see, you know, what I see on a daily basis and the impact that the trauma and the lack of education, lack of resources is having on their young lives. We utilize Zoom a lot more than we used to before the pandemic. So we utilize it to make sure families don't have to come off work all day just to come and have 15-minute hearings, but can log in from work or wherever they are, take it from their car. It just gives them more of a flexibility to do that. And then we do family-specific tailored dispositions that allow for me to access safety concerns when they're returning children home to their families, so we can make sure it's very specific to their needs and not very broad. We meet with young people, bring them into a court system, bring them to a courthouse as a way to really encourage them to see that the justice system can be a partner and need not be adversarial in the process. We do a lot of stuff like making sure that parents who have, you know, inclusion of incarcerated parent in the conversation about their children. We involve parents in conversation and listening for concerns related to how a case is moving. What do they need to see? So we want to make sure that they have those kind of supports. And then lastly, it's also a reminder that even if you can't do the wholesale changing of the system, that the system is made up of people. And what we're trying to do is to eliminate the micro cuts that kids and people feel in their communities. How do we make sure that that's not something that they have to experience? And this little video by Toni Morrison really made my mind, like, it's just like, boom, man, this is amazing. This is exactly what we should do. And it's just a simple question. Does your face light up when the kid walks in the room? And that was this is an amazing little short video to really capture that idea.
If you were to ask me in the early 90s, what is the big lesson you've learned from this show? I would have said that the common denominator in the human experience is that everybody just wants to be appreciated or validated. That got clarified in such a way that the hairs on my head rose when I heard Toni Morrison, who was on the show for The Bluest Eye, one of my favorite books of all time. I'd chosen her for book club selection yet again. And she said these words.
It's interesting to see when a kid walks in the room, your child or anybody else's child, does your face light up? And that's what they're looking for. When my children used to walk in the room when they were little, I looked at them to see if they had buckled their trousers, or if their hair was combed, or if their socks were up. And so you think your affection and your deep love is on display because you're caring for them. It's not. When they see you, they see the critical face. What's wrong now? But then if you let your, as I tried from then on, to let your face speak what's in your heart, because when they walked in the room, I was glad to see them. It's just as small as that, you see.
That is
Just something that small just does your face light up, man. And when the kids come in, I try to make sure, you know, even as a judge, even to the parents and other cases, you know, I try to make sure my face lights up because I want them to see that this is a part of it. Like I said in the video, you know, I'm not only that judge, I'm a reflection, been through all kinds of trauma in my life, but the goal is to make sure that I give this energy to our young people. So whether I'm being silly with young people in court or holding babies that are about to be adopted or bringing young people into the court system to talk about it, or even going out into the community. I have a thing where I like to go out into the community, take my robe and ask the question, who wants to be a basketball player or who wants to be football or who wants to be a judge? Because I want them to think about being a judge, and I put my robe on them, you know, speaking to groups of young men in the community. This young woman was a special case. She just, you know, she was really, you know, had really given up on education. And I brought her and her class up to the school so they could be able to experience the court system. And then, when I was running for the Supreme Court, came across this young man, Ricardo. His grandmother knew I was coming into town and brought her to the historic Coffee Makes You Black in Milwaukee. And it was just an opportunity to see a young man whose father is incarcerated, mama's has a substance use disorders, on drugs, and, you know, the whole narrative. And so when I put my little robe on him was a way to encourage him and his grandmother to say, stay positive. And it's just amazing to see that you can do small things to be able to transform the narrative so that we can work together as a community. So, you know, as we think about the role that faith plays in all of these things, it may seem overwhelming. But the small things that can be done, whether it's from CASA volunteers, starting a CASA program, you know, mobilizing your groups to be able to ask the question, what can you fundamentally do to support the court systems in your community and the families, whether it's through gift cards or, you know, Christmases or, you know, make Thanksgiving opportunities to support families. There's a lot of small things that can be done that attaches ourselves inside of the CASA program. Is a court-appointed special advocate program that I talked about earlier. If you Google CASA, it is a wonderful opportunity to have people get inside the court system, to be able to work with the courtroom partners, to be present in ways that you cannot be present right now. So those are some of the suggestions I would give, and I'll stop there. And if there are any questions, I will try to answer them.
Judge, there's a question in the chat on what is CASA? Can you explain it more clearly?
All right. I thought I just did it, but I'll do it again. So CASA is a court-appointed special advocate. And so it is that program in which, you know, you'll get a chance to come inside the court system and become volunteers. It's almost like a Big Brothers Big Sister program for court-appointed volunteers. So the court appoints you, it's confidential, but you get a chance to work with families and children as a part of the court process. And that's something I think, regardless of you in a rural or urban environment, that's something that everybody can do and still be able to lean in and be supportive, and possibly even start one in your own community that allows for you to be able to participate. And then again, also, you know, encourage ride-alongs. You know, I know that the court system can seem very daunting and so big, much like a hospital, because you never know where to start. But, you know, build those good relationships with your judges so you can do ride-alongs and begin to see what it looks like. And that will help inform the kind of advocacy and ways in which you shape your community so they could be able to participate in transforming this narrative.
I'm glad you mentioned not using labels like addict or there's a word for that people are trying to get away from for someone who's incarcerated. So I think in medicine as well, we're not labeling people as diabetics. It's a person who has diabetes. And in my work with substance use disorder in pregnant women, especially, we don't want to talk about addict. It's a person who has an illness, and it's a brain disease, and it's not a lifelong disease if it can be treated. So that I think that was really an important point. One of the things that I have run into with my work with Black Mamas Matter and many other organizations of color is that we are white women mostly. And someone said to me once that their worst enemy are suburban white women. So we absolutely need to acknowledge white privilege. So how can we best make that connection and do the work that you're talking about without coming in and telling people how to do it?
Well, I think that's an interesting perspective, because I do think that there are a lot of good intentions that fall short because they're not conscious of the kind of racial historical legacy that comes along with that privilege. And so, I always tell people, if you ever want to have a good critique, go read Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter to the Birmingham jail, where he talks about the white moderate, and just kind of listen to how Dr. King is talking about, that people don't want conflict. And in Wisconsin, that is very risk averse, right? It's that, Midwest nice, passive aggressive. Nobody wants to, call what it is in the room. So you have to be very thoughtful about that as well. But, sometimes just being able to be honest about it, saying what you don't know, you may not be the best at this, you may not have all of the phrases down, but treat it just like you would in the other community. I can imagine the LGBTQ, our community have been hit with a lot of different, ways in which people still use terminology that doesn't reflect our evolution and understanding of sexuality and gender identity. Just admit you don't know. And then that community at least can know that you're open to the idea. We can have a conversation about that. But, whether you're suburban or rural, for the most part, I would say the opiate epidemic has opened up a lot of people to this new conversation about, what is criminal and what is the image, right? The image has really been transforming. And I think that's what we have to pay attention to. Laura put something in the chat, and I know I'll be wrapping it up. Somebody had to hit me with what I considered running for Supreme Court again. Well, here we go. So I would say that, Laura, one of the things that I have always done, I grew up, I faced a lot of trauma. I spent 12 years in a sexual abusive situation with my mother and family. And I talk about this openly because it left me with the inability to read. And so I grew up as an 18-year-old, not able to read. But I will say that my faith community, my commitment to God, my calling at the age of 15 years old gave me something to inspire to. So while I couldn't read, I could listen. I was a great listener. And at the age of 18 years old, I had some wonderful teachers, Ms. Daisy Wilson and Margaret Bell, who taught me how to read at 18. And all of the stuff that Dr. Kathy read off from, Princeton and Morehouse, none of that's possible if I didn't go to that small junior college and had those two Black women teach me how to read and write. So I think those kind of ideas of transformation that's possible, like I'm looking at myself as a judge, and yet I came from some of the similar places that a lot of these young people come from. I can say to them that there is a path that doesn't, it's not going to feel, you're not gonna always feel, straight and narrow. It's gonna feel like it's all over the place. You're gonna experience homelessness. You're gonna have your ups, your downs, make mistakes, not make mistakes. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is to figure out ways that you can retain your level of humanity and not give up on yourself, not lose hope. Because hope is I think is the secret ingredient for transformation. I think that's what Jesus came. And when he came into the temples or when he came to people who were blind, he would ask them questions like, do you want to see again? I mean, they had lost hope. Do you want to walk again? They lost hope. Do you want to live? I mean, all of those kind of things are things that we want to make sure that we focus on. So I think closing prisons in Wisconsin, I would say that that is a tall order, because we'd have to literally get 110% behind making sure that all of the systems work together. And I can tell you, mental health, medical, education, like we have to do all, the court systems all have to do a better job at serving families and people in general, so that we don't have to build prisons. Prison is an outcome. It is an outcome of so many different small things that did not happen in most people's lives. You may have some people, some outliers who just sociopaths who just, go out and are just violent. But for the most part, it is an incremental thing that we have seen over the years. And some of the things that we think about criminality hasn't changed in decades. And so I think the more we can, update our understanding of trauma and what trauma looks like, then we can be able to apply that knowledge into the lives of everybody else.
When you speak of trauma, I'm on a Facebook group called Prison Friends and Families. I have a family member that's in prison now, and they talk about their loved one being put in solitary, which they call the hole. One of our church members, Dr. Steve Dykstra, is a Milwaukee County crisis psychologist. He talks about the harm to our youth, our juveniles at Lincoln Hills who are put in solitary confinement. From my understanding, solitary is some of the most awful trauma that people can suffer. So there is and we'll talk about it at the end, Wisdom is having a invite at the Capitol on the 23rd, on Tuesday, to end solitary confinement. What else can we do to stop this, especially to our juveniles?
Well, I would say for updated information, Lincoln Hills is under consent decree, so it can't use solitary confinement anymore since it's been up under the federal investigation. So they're all in a housed unit. They're not, put into the restrictive housing or solitary confinement or the hole like they do. They still do it in, in local jails and prisons, and it is a practice to the degree in which, yes, it is. We know it doesn't reap any kind of mental health benefits whatsoever. But again, in the absence of what I consider to say trauma or mental health resources that are really dedicated to addressing, a lot of the mental health that we see, we're going to continue to have institutions that are being built to house those individuals that our community has not collectively been able to address or support in their time. So I know I'm at my time, so I can recapture some of this beautiful Saturday. But I want to thank you all so much, and I'll make sure I send the PowerPoint to you, Dot, and you can be able to share it more widely with everyone else. All right.
Thank you so much, and I think all have been touched.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate your love, your passion. God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.